The Detroit Pistons are absolutely terrible, but Cade Cunningham, for the most part, is pretty good. But because of the situation that the Pistons have put themselves in, where the roster is so bad, the future looks so bleak, they have to decide this year if Cade Cunningham is the franchise cornerstone that they drafted him to be when they picked him first overall. And part of the issue with that, in terms of evaluating Cade Cunningham right now, is he is playing pretty much a completely different role than we thought that he would at the NBA level. He's still doing fine. He's still doing well. The stats look good on a night-to-night basis. You can catch Cade Cunningham on a good night and things look fantastic. But he wasn't supposed to be this super high volume scorer on a terrible team. The mindset for him as a draft pick was that he had great size, was a pretty good passer, and could be like the driver of an offense, that he would elevate other players, that as the team got better around him, he would then even look that much better because he's someone that facilitates, that creates, not necessarily as an outstanding passer, but he creates advantages for everyone else with his size, with his skill. And interestingly, when you look at him in year 3 compared to SGA in year 3, there's a lot of similarities, obviously statistically, but also in terms of their play styles. Now, SGA has gone on to be a crazy good scorer, 30-point per game guy, but right now, year 3 SGA versus year 3 Cade is actually a pretty good comparison. A bigger guard that uses size and angles to create, is a really good passer, but not like a special top tier level passer at the NBA level. And then obviously Cade is bigger than SGA as well. And if you're looking at things positively and optimistically for Detroit, that's the comp right now that you're hoping Cade Cunningham turns into. But right now, he has to force so many things because the Pistons are the worst shooting team in the league. They're a terrible team in general. And so playing the right way, the way that Cade was supposed to when you drafted him, the way that you thought that he would when you drafted him, where he's involving everyone else and he drives the offense rather than just trying to score every time down the floor, that style of play isn't possible right now, because he knows that if he kicks the ball out to one of these terrible shooters, it's often a pretty great way to lose. And so when that happens, you have these moments like the second half against the Nets where he looks a lot like SGA. If you squint, if you look at it the right way, he's elevating for tough mid-range twos. He's finding his way to the rim, playing at his own pace. He's not an explosive athlete, but he still finds a way to get there, makes an occasional three, all that stuff. He looks a lot like SGA, which is really exciting. But if you put year 3 SGA on this Pistons roster the way that Cade is right now, things are also going to look really, really rough at times, and it makes it impossible to evaluate Cade Cunningham overall, which is the whole point of this season now. And when I say things start to look rough, of course I mean that the efficiency for Cade is not going to be very good. He's not going to shoot a high percentage because all the attention is on him. He's going to turn the ball over a ton because all the attention is on him and there's no spacing on the floor. And the concern is he a very skilled player that was worth getting picked first overall, that is now developing some bad habits and completely changing his play style out of necessity, and then still putting up good numbers just on a bad team? And to me, the concern would be, is Cade Cunningham eventually just going to turn into the next D'Angelo Russell? Player that looks fine, has some explosive moments, but he's not an every possession offensive guy. He's not a core piece of your team. Because right now, Detroit is operating as if Cade is a core piece, but that doesn't feel like a guarantee right now. The range right now for Cade Cunningham is he could become basically a slightly taller SGA, or he could be D'Angelo Russell. And some of you might really like D'Angelo Russell, but he's not someone that helps you win a ton of games. He's a relatively helpful offensive player and he's skilled, but he's not a core foundational piece, which is made that much more difficult for Detroit by the fact that Cade is going to need this new contract soon. You have to decide pretty soon if Cade Cunningham is the core franchise player for your team, because with how bad the team is overall around him, you could easily argue that right now at the deadline or in the offseason is the time to shop and trade away Cade Cunningham, because you still don't know who he is or what he's going to become. And in the optimistic line of thinking, yeah, he could become SGA, and that sounds awesome. You put some other good players around him, some of the other guys develop, and that sounds great. But he also could become D'Angelo Russell. And right now, he's valued more on the positive side of that evaluation. But if you wait too long and the rest of the league figures out and you figure out that he's not this core foundational piece, his value is going to go down significantly in a trade. And as bad as it seems like things are right now for Detroit, Cade is the guy that they're holding on to and hoping that he's the future. And if he starts to look like kind of the bottom half of the evaluation right now, things just get that much worse for Detroit, especially if they don't get anything out of him in a trade before that. But the problem is, this feels like such a dramatic decision. Teams don't do this anymore. Teams trade away, top 5, top 10 picks after a year, 2 years. That does happen. But not when they're playing well, not when they're putting up the numbers that Cade is putting up, not when you can pull up moments of him looking like potentially an SGA level player, an all NBA level guard. Teams don't trade away those guys, no matter how bad the team is. Even though this is a historically bad team, teams don't do that. But it is worth wondering if that is a decision that Detroit needs to make, that is going to be the right call for their franchise, for the future of Detroit Pistons basketball, to trade Cade Cunningham right now. But the problem with all this, the title of the video is the Cade Cunningham problem. The real problem with this is the roster construction has been so poor. The coaching has been so poor that it has gone beyond, oh my gosh, we are just this terrible team with a historically bad team. It can get worse than that. You could be historically bad and still at least properly evaluate your players. Things are so bad that you cannot possibly evaluate how good Cade is or isn't and where he's going to fall on that SGA to D-Lo spectrum. And that, quite frankly, is the worst possible situation to be in as an NBA team, because I'm sure there are Pistons fans watching this video that are thinking that they wouldn't mind if the team traded away Cade and they just went for this full, complete reset. But there's a realistic possibility that you're trading away an all-NBA caliber player. I do feel like that is possible. It's within a range of outcomes, realistically, for Cade Cunningham to be an all-star, to be a really good player. And you could just trade that guy away when you have him under team control and you just have to give him this big contract. On the other hand, you could give him the big contract, not trade him, and he's just like a solid starting guard over the next couple of seasons, and that's all you get out of him. And not being able to understand where he is on that spectrum because of how bad the team is and how bad the roster is and how bad the coaching is, that is the worst possible place you can be as an NBA team. It's not sitting in the middle and trying to have all these different roster decisions that you need to make. Do we need to get worse? Do we need to get better? It's being so bad that you don't even know how good your best player is. And if I was in charge in Detroit and you asked me, what should you do about Cade Cunningham? For me, I would be very hesitant to hand out this massive contract to a player that might not be what you think that he is. When it's a complete unknown right now, what he's going to be in the future, and you're asking me to give him this gigantic contract and potentially limit his value moving forward in the future, when even if he is SGA in a year or 2 years, there's no guarantee that this roster is going to be even remotely close to anything semi-playoff competitive. And when things are as uncertain as they are with his evaluation and the future of the team, I would be very willing to explore what his value is, because right now that unknown works in your favor in terms of trade value. That unknown works in a way that teams think, oh man, look at what Cade could become. Look at what he could be a year, 2 years from now. We never get opportunities like this to trade for a guy that was the first overall pick in the draft a couple of years ago and is putting up some solid numbers this year. We don't get this opportunity ever. That unknown works in your favor right now. But the second that everybody starts to turn on him, or you give him this big deal and he's not very good, then all of a sudden you're in a situation where not only is the roster terrible, but you've lost so much value in a possible Cade trade. So I would explore it. I'm not saying I would do it, but I would look into it. I would see what the value of Cade Cunningham could potentially be in a trade. And really, the bottom line is, Cade's good. We don't really know how good he's going to be ultimately, and the situation itself is what is making this such a difficult problem for the Detroit Pistons to solve.